All right, welcome everyone. Welcome. Thanks everyone for coming on a Tuesday night to this event. A brief introduction will follow, and then I'll give it over to Peter Banda and Rachel Kleinfeld. And I'm sorry to say that our third presenter, Dylan Shalinsky, who was going to be here, called me a couple hours ago. He's sick and can't make it. So it's going to be two presenters instead of three, just to let you know where we're headed with this. I want to give some thanks, first of all, to the writing program, and in particular, a committee that put this together, the Teaching Support Committee. Those people are represented by Amber Engelson, who might be one of your teachers. Me. Yeah, you can clap if you want. Sure, yeah. Sarah Hart-Mickey. Yeah. And Camilla Kenyon. So those are the people who had something to do with putting this together, and I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what this is for. First, I'll just read the couple lines from the flyer that you might have seen about what this event is supposed to talk about. It says, quote, "This roundtable conversation will invite our first-year writing program students to expand their notions of writing past the ivory tower as two diverse speakers from the Denver community discuss their writing processes as public intellectuals." I'll add this, that when we were coming up with this event, we thought about the potential topic or the potential title for this that would be, "What's a Writer?" And that's sort of the idea behind this. I think a lot of you as freshmen may have the idea that when you hear the word writer, you think, well, what? What do you think? Anyone have an idea of what a writer looks like? Typically, it's like a novelist, someone who's sitting in a room, typing out a story in isolation, possibly working alone. Party foul number one. But in fact, a writer in 2014 is a lot of different things. It's not just that. And a large part of the goal of this presentation is to give you a more concrete vision for what else a writer is, besides just some guy who sits in a room and writes a story. Of course, that is one thing that a writer can be, but there are other things as well, including what Peter Banda is as a journalist, or what Rachel Kleinfeld is as a senior fellow at the Carnegie Institute. And so that's sort of a frame for what we're going to do. I'll sort of outline for you what's going to happen. First of all, Rachel Kleinfeld, who I'll introduce in a minute, will come up and speak for 10 to 15 minutes about her work and her writing. Peter Banda will then do the same. And after that, the two of us, or the three of us rather, will sit down and sort of have a conversation, the three of us, about their work and their writing. And then we'll invite you then to join the conversation and ask whatever questions you might have for our panelists, either about writing or whatever it is about their jobs that you find interesting. So with that brief introduction, I'll just present or introduce Peter Banda, and he'll talk to you a bit about his work. And I'll keep these introductions brief. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. First up then is Rachel Kleinfeld. And I'll give a very brief introduction to her, since she's probably going to speak at greater length and better than I could about what she does. But I'll just say for now that she serves as senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where she works on deepening the rule of law in other countries. Please welcome Rachel Kleinfeld.
Well, thank you. First, I just want to say thank you to Blake and Amber and the DU Writing Program. You guys are so lucky to be taught writing. You might not feel that way right now, but as someone who hires a lot of people right out of college, I can tell you that writing skills are one of the first things we look for hiring people, and those who don't have them just don't get jobs. And so for that reason alone, it is good that you're here, since being hired after work is important. But it's also a lot of fun to do good writing, and it helps you express the things that you have inside that you want to get out. And so I want to talk about a couple of different ways in which I use writing in my career. So before I started at the Carnegie Endowment, I'll get to that in a minute, I was a graduate student. I was at Oxford University. It was election season here in America, and I was incredibly frustrated with the political process and what was going on here. And to deal with that, I ended up starting a nonprofit that became, over the last 10 years, something that's really worked to change the way America does foreign policy. It's called the Truman National Security Project, And our idea was national security should be about much more than tanks and guns and bullets. It should include that, but it should also include human rights and international development and other aspects of our foreign policy. How do we get that point across to people? What kinds of things do we do? Well, we did a lot of things. We did a lot of writing. We did a lot of talking. We do a lot of educating of politicians. And one thing we did was produce ads. And so I wanted to play you one of the ads. And then I'll talk, oh, actually maybe I won't play you the ad. Well, never mind. Sorry, it existed a minute ago. Let's see here. Okay, never mind. I won't play you the ad. I will instead talk to you through a slideshow. But I will say that it's a really great ad. And I'll give Blake the information if you want to see it on your own. But the point was that that ad, it's a political ad, has to be written by someone. Every word that you see in that advertisement, whether it's a Coca-Cola advertisement or in this case it was an advertisement for international foreign aid and why that was important, has to be written. That ad was written by our intern. He was 22 years old, and we hired him because it was such a good job writing a pithy, short, exciting piece of work. Now, in my current work as a senior associate at a think tank, I don't write pithy, short, interesting, fun pieces of work that people want to see on TV. I write long, boring books, and they look like this, or like that. They feature cops beating people up, and these are not things that people want to read, right? They're boring, and they're kind of scary and off-putting. And yet, I tend to think they're really important. I got into this field because I care about human rights. I care a lot about helping cops not be brutal. And I really wanted to figure out how could America do that better overseas. And so I really wanted people to learn what I had to say about this, to learn the insights that I had, and to take them to heart and change our policies, because we spend billions of dollars a year training foreign militaries, training foreign police forces. And I wanted us to do it in a way that was humane and that was functional and that worked well. So how do you do that? You have to write, but nobody wants to read it. Nobody wants to do anything that opens this book. Nobody has time. How do you engage people? And I always start with stories. So I'm going to read you the first paragraph of this book. In the winter of 1992, I traveled to St. Petersburg to live with my brother, who was working with the city's first Russian-American theater company. Its office was located just above one of the favorite night spots of the rising Russian mafia. Every day we would walk to work past kiosks that had been burned out the night before, a message to shopkeepers to pay their protection money. At night, we would try to avoid the burly men who had already kidnapped two of our actors, releasing them late at night, stripped, in a forest. We were among the first Americans living in the city since the Soviet Union's demise, and the mafia assumed we were rich. One day, a gangster pulled a few of the troupe aside and offered them a nuclear submarine for a bargain price. The man was far off the mark about actors' material resources, not to mention our desire for a weapon of war, so we'll never know if the offer was real. But it was plausible in those cowboy capitalist days after the fall of the Soviet Union, when anything and everything seemed to be for sale. That's a story. And people are hardwired psychologically to remember stories. And so instead of throwing people facts and figures and so on, when I try to start with what I'm doing, boring as it might be, but important as I think it is, I try to start with stories. Stalin said that 1 million deaths is a statistic, but a single death is a tragedy. And that's how we humans tend to think of things. So you want to make it human and try to get people to feel and think and remember. The other kind of writing I do, this is about energy. It was another book that I wrote. Even more boring, electrifying the developing world through markets and distributed energy. Here I'm talking about business and a bunch of words people don't know. And one of the ways that I got people to start reading this book, and this ended up influencing Senate legislation. So the Obama administration had a Power Africa program. And that Power Africa program has put American money into developing energy markets in Africa. And thanks in part to this book, part of that legislation has put money into solar power and microhydro and other natural forms of energy. So I feel pretty good about the impact. Did anyone read this book? In fact, they did, stunningly enough, because no one in DC has any time to read. But part of why they read is because you use quick and clever little tricks. So if you look at the book itself, it looks like a normal book. But all throughout, I put little quotes like this. Give people little guides to what you're doing. That's what the book is about, that one quote. And if all somebody does is skim the book and read the quotes, they come to know what it's about. Here's another trick that we writers use when we're trying to get our ideas across. This is called a summary brief. It's a one-pager. People on Capitol Hill, where I often have to go to talk, they don't read books, but they will read one page. So you have one page to get your thoughts across. How do you express in writing something that's really deep and thoughtful? Bullet points turn out to be extremely helpful. Bullet points, boldface, small taglines. So again, in writing, trying to get your ideas across, trying to influence people who have the power to change the lives of millions of people overseas, which is what this work ends up doing, comes down to things like, can you write a good story that gets somebody's emotions so that you're hitting their heart and not just their head? Can you use good visuals so that when someone looks at the book, it looks attractive? Or they look at your one-pager, I guess you can't really see that because it's fuzzy, but they can just see bullet points. They can read really quickly. They can get through things quickly. Another way of influencing public opinion that I end up doing a lot is op-eds. And this looks really ugly, and that's for a reason here. The first time I ever wrote an op-ed, I was 19 years old. I was working as a summer intern at a group called the International Human Rights League. It was one of the early human rights organizations that worked with the United Nations. And I really cared a lot about Burma, which has been in the news lately, but at that point was just a nothing country that no one had ever heard of, where some of the worst human rights abuses in the world were happening. You don't have to read this, by the way. If you try, you're just going to hurt your eyes. So don't even give it a try. I was on the phone with someone who was at a radio station when Aung San Suu Kyi, who was the president of Burma, the elected president of Burma, was released from house arrest. And the person at the radio station said, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do. I need to have a show on at 5 p.m. Do you want to be on my show?" And at 19 years old, I wasn't going to say no. I said, "Sure, I'll be on your show. I'll talk about Burma on the radio." This sounds really exciting to me, because one of the secrets of journalists that my friend from the AP might tell you is that they have really tight deadlines, and they're just desperate to get people to speak who are supposed experts. And I had a title at this human rights organization, never mind that I was an intern. So I went that night on the radio, and the other person on the radio show with me was from Amnesty International, and that was my hero. What I wanted to be at 19 years old was the executive director of Amnesty International someday, and so I deferred to this other person. And it turned out they didn't actually know that much about Burma. And so the whole time we were on the radio, I was deferring. This other person wasn't really saying things that I thought were right, and I was getting more and more upset in my 19-year-old way. I really wanted to say my part, but I, on the other hand, felt like I should defer to authority here. And in the end, I had all these things to say, none of which had been said, and so I decided to write an op-ed. And I'd never written an op-ed before. But this is a great way for people who have an opinion about something to get it out there. And it turns out, I now know, that lots of op-eds are written by just normal people. They're not always written by famous people. In fact, the organization I started places op-eds. We place hundreds of op-eds a year by people who have no particular standing. They just write really well. So the first thing I did was downloaded a bunch of op-eds into Word to see how they looked on the page. And what they look like on a page is like this. And that's why I wanted to show you this. Lots of short paragraphs, 1 or 2 sentences. Sometimes you get a paragraph of just 1 sentence. Easy language. They have guidelines, like you can see there, first, second, finally. There's a way of writing op-eds that I'll get to in a minute that is sort of a formula that you can learn. I didn't know that at the time, but I wrote this op-ed. I put it in the Wall Street Journal. I sent it off, and it got picked up. I was stunned. And so was every other human rights organization, who were just livid at me because nobody had ever heard, and Burma never gets in the news. And here I had usurped the place of all sorts of people much more important than me, who should have had that op-ed, the one op-ed a year that gets in the newspaper about Burma. But because I was a decent writer and had figured out how to write an op-ed, it was my ideas that got out there, and that was pretty exciting. What I learned about writing, I learned from my father, and this makes him a little bit grumpy because I am, and this is not a partisan environment, but I will say that I am a progressive Democrat. My father is a conservative Republican, and I have since used all of the techniques he taught me about writing to express my opinions, which are not his opinions, and so I see this as sort of a vindication. But what my dad taught me was very true, and it came straight from Strunk and White. And what he said, which I used in that op-ed, and which I'll pass on to you, are very simple rules. First, short declarative sentences. They work. In op-eds and in other writing, people who write short sentences get listened to. It sounds very emphatic. That's why I'm speaking in them. Fewer commas. Cut adverbs and adjectives. If you write beautifully and lengthily and take your time so that each word rolls off the tongue in a thoughtful manner, you will take up so much space that your op-ed will never get placed. And it's a weaker form of writing. Adverbs and adjectives are usually substitutions for really strong nouns and verbs. And those are much stronger ways of expressing yourself. You get more out there. Some of your teachers might kill me for saying this, but I use Anglo-Saxon words rather than French and Latin roots. Now that will sound really esoteric probably to a lot of you, but Anglo-Saxon words are short. They're words like use rather than utilize. And a lot of times, especially when you're young, you try to use longer multisyllabic words because they sound really impressive. But they're harder to read, and they make for more obfuscated writing. So your writing gets kind of clunky and all turned up in itself. And if you're writing to be understood by different audiences, shorter, simpler, it's the way to go. If you're writing creatively, like a novelist or a poet, totally different. But I'm writing to be heard by policymakers who have very short attention spans. Anglo-Saxon words, simple language, not a lot of misconceptions, not a lot of need to sound smart. Now, someone who did not learn this at a very early age was John Kerry. And I'll tell you a story about the founding of this nonprofit. When I was working in Oxford, I was serving as a really low-level peon on his campaign, his first presidential campaign. And I was supposed to ghostwrite op-eds for generals. And at that point, I'd placed a lot of op-eds. And I thought I was pretty decent at it. But I was writing op-eds for that campaign that generals were supposed to be actually writing. I was just the ghostwriter. And so I would write short, emphatic sentences with Anglo-Saxon words, very strong, because that's how generals speak, and it's also a good way to write an op-ed. And I would get them back from the Kerry campaign, and they would be much more like John Kerry speaks, which is, and I should say I serve on a State Department Foreign Affairs Board. I think very highly of John Kerry. I've worked with him, and he's a very, very good diplomat. But he's not a good op-ed writer. And he writes with very long, flowy sentences with lots of commas, and they go on, and lots of French words. In fact, he speaks French very well. And as a result, not a single one of the op-eds that I wrote got placed. And so I felt vindicated, but he lost the election. So what's the op-ed format? It's a very strong format. You start with a news hook. Something has to be happening. You use that in your first line. You have a paragraph that lays out your main idea. Here's what it's all about. A couple of paragraphs that support your main idea, a few paragraphs that rebut potential criticism, and then a strong ending. And you want to use some drama, and so on. And you want to use simple language. This was the last op-ed I placed was about a week ago. It was about Iran sanctions. And I placed it in the San Francisco Chronicle because I wanted to say good job to the senators from California who had made some really courageous moves on this legislation. And it ended with don't screw it up. You know, it's not a real highfalutin thing to say. But it's pretty clear. And when you're speaking to policymakers and you're trying to get your ideas across, you want to be really clear. So I'll end on this. I use writing as a way to influence people. And I try to influence people because I think that we all have a duty as someone who was born into a country where I'm free, as a woman who has more opportunity here than I would have in most places on earth, as a Jewish woman who knows that as a religious minority in most countries I wouldn't have much opportunity, and here I do. I feel like it is a tremendous, tremendous gift that I've been given to be able to learn and think and have opinions and express them freely and hopefully use them to make the world a slightly more just place, a slightly better place, and a place where other people have some opportunity like I do. And I want to use my words and my writing to get that point across so that the strongest country on earth, which we still are, uses its policy tools and its money to do some good in the world. And so that's why I write, and I highly encourage you all to get really good at it too.
And so now, Peter Banda, who is a Denver-based video journalist for the Associated Press. He specializes in breaking news and features stories of national interest. Here is Peter Banda.
Let me just do a quick setup here.
Don't screw it up. Might actually be.
Directed at us.
Key term here. It usually just tucks right in. Oh, the dongle might not work. Do you have a new map?
I've got it.
Okay,
Got it.
so it fits. All right,
Get this
just throw
through
that
there.
in there, and then, but yeah, it should. There we go. Sorry about that. Hey, it just dawned on me. I should have you email me. I don't-
We dead?
With the links.
Oh, there we go.
No?
Okay.
Let's see, where's the, did you?
Right here.
All right. The tech kid's using,
Is that going to come up?
maybe. Do you know how to fix it? What? Do you know how to fix
No, I
it?
don't. Do you?
No. There's a tech guy. It's like a mirror thing on there.
So click on, yeah, you're good.
Yes. Thank
Oh,
you,
that's
Megan
great.
Kelly.
Thank you so
And then
much.
you can just close it.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Hello. I'm Peter Banda. I'm with the Associated Press. I write under my middle name, and it's P. Solomon Banda. So if you ever see a byline with under P. Solomon Banda, that's me. I've been in Denver since 1999, and I've covered a lot of stories. Name a story that's happened here in that time, and I've probably had a hand in it. Balloon Boy. Anyone remember that one? I was out chasing, right? A lot of people saw that on TV. I was out chasing that balloon when it was out in the field. Met the farmer who saw it coming down. There was a plot to bomb the New York City subway system in 2009. Anyone remember that? Najibullah Zazi, Aurora. I shook his hand. He struck me as just a college kid, and I thought, oh my gosh, they're just totally slamming this guy. He just seemed at ease at any college campus you could imagine. He wasn't scary, didn't have fangs or anything, and I was at his doorstep trying to get his comment. I'm blanking out right now on the stories. I mean, just recently we had the school shooting at Arapahoe High School. I was there. So a lot of sad stories that I get a chance to cover, and the reason why I do that and the reason why I write is because I like to understand the world. And I believe very strongly that through writing and through reporting these stories, we advance knowledge, even if it's just a little bit, even if there's a little salaciousness to it, even if it's just a matter of why did this kid shoot his sister, or why did this guy walk into this high school. Writing itself, to me, there was a college professor that I remember who broke it down for me after going through high school, after going through grammar school, and finally getting into college and being in a college class. He broke down what writing is to me. He said basically a sentence is a subject, a verb, and a predicate. Forget everything you know about diagramming a sentence. Dump that. Throw that out there. Something is something. That's it. That's a sentence. You have your subject, who you're talking about. You have your verb, and then you have what you're saying about the subject. If you can master that, you've got what you were talking about, Rachel, short declarative sentences. and they do get attention, and they do get read. AP is a cooperative news organization. We've been around since 1846. Although, yeah, 1846. That's 2 years after the telegraph. I just want to point out that we were using technology as that was coming up, and I'm telling you, we had the series of dots and dashes, like we were right on top of it. We had a correspondent at the Gettysburg Address, so that's as far as I'll go into that. Otherwise, I'll just be talking about the AP. We have a mobile app that we have out there. Just go to your Google Play or your Apple Store and download the app, and you'll get the latest news. Spoiler alert, you'll get all the stuff from Associates is happening. So if you guys want to know what happened to Shaun White, you can get it on our app. We're supported through newspapers, and we're also supported through broadcast. Okay, so having said that, we talked about writing, we talked about what a sentence is, we talked about the AP. I want to keep this short. I want to talk about a particular piece that I did that I really enjoyed doing. A couple things about this piece is that, let me go back to it, is that it didn't involve death and destruction. It was fun. And this was a piece that my kids could look at and enjoy. Half the stuff I write, I don't show it to them. I don't talk about it. Just, Daddy just went to work today. So this piece today is about Twitter. During the fall, Twitter did an IPO. And for me, when they came out, I'm probably a little bit behind the curve here, but I just couldn't understand how it is that Twitter makes money. Volume, right? I mean, people tweet, and the more tweets, they get money. Okay, how does that work? Well, there's different ways that they can make money. One of them is they can take the whole feed and use the data collected from that and sell it to people. And that one is pretty much the one that as I was researching this article was pretty much well known. That this is what they're doing. They can market it. They can see your habits. They can see what you're talking about. They can see what your friends are talking about, and kind of get an understanding of who you are, and then tailor advertising to you. But there was another way that they can make money that I found interesting. So I'm just going to play this video, and it's pretty self-explanatory what it is.
Getting your picture on the giant screen at an NFL stadium just got easier.
What's going on?
Just tweet it and see if
Can you guys hear that? You guys can hear it over there, out there? Try that again. Sorry.
Getting your picture on the giant screen at an NFL stadium just got easier. Just tweet
this
it
one?
and see if the Denver Broncos pick it.
Okay.
Getting your picture on the giant
Try to get it up there. It's not doing it.
Getting your picture on the giant screen at an NFL stadium just got easier. Just tweet it and see if the Denver Broncos pick it.
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Denver-based Weigh-In, co-founded by Sun Microsoft Systems founder Scott McNeely, has developed software to help the Broncos scroll through the thousands of tweets sent on game day.
That's really the key, is that we're not just going to put anything and everything out there because, as you can imagine, there's some things that you don't just want to pull right in.
Weigh-In software can be used to put Twitter feeds onto the web, mobile phones, and on television. And there's potential for newly publicly traded Twitter to develop revenue streams to help it turn a profit.
Clients are buying our software as a service. They're using it to bring Twitter into their experiences in venue, on web. And then Twitter makes money through us as a partner.
Twitter declined to discuss the revenue potential of partnering with small
the
companies
cameo
such
from
as
the University of Denver in
but
here.
experts are taking note.
This is a good test to see if we can make money, see if someone can curate their content and their data in a format that makes the customer so they don't have to reach out to the Denver Broncos themselves.
There's just one thing fans need to do before heading to the stadium. Make sure the battery is charged.
Back when we had Trios and Blackberries, it used to be a 3-day battery life. These days, I can't get through a day.
Peter Banda, Associated Press, Denver.
Okay, so that's a fun story. I got a chance to go to the Broncos game when they're playing Kansas City. Very strict rules on what I could film. I couldn't film anything on the field. So that's why you just saw fans, playing around there. But I mean, this basically is, you have a bunch of small companies that are out selling Twitter, basically partnering with other companies. So it's kind of a cool synergy that's going on there. So I found that interesting. I thought that was another thing that Twitter's doing that will help us understand what this phenomenon that I imagine that most people in this room probably use, or at least have used, or at least have heard of. I thought it was an interesting story. So that was a video story, but this one also needed a print story, because there's a lot there. And I thought, okay, we did the research. Let's turn this into a print story and see what we can do with that. There was
The war again.
sorry. So we already have business writers that do this kind of stuff. So this audience was basically for the general audience. This was just a basic news story that anybody, you don't even have to know what Twitter is, can pick up this news story and kind of get an idea of what's going on. What's this phenomenon, it's not just and here I'm thinking of Grandma and the slide I have here. It's not just the grandkids who are playing around with their cell phones. I mean, Twitter is a real business. It's not just something that you play around with. So as I'm sitting down to write my story, I'm getting tripped up on lots of details, and one of the things as a writer is editing. You have to cut out a lot of the clutter and get to exactly what it is you want to say. And one of the things that I was really having trouble with was, okay, how this is for general audience, how deep do I have to go in explaining what Twitter is? Do I have to explain it? I mean, do I have to go into what a hashtag is, and do I have to go into what followers are? Do I have to get into, and I was just driving myself crazy with that. I actually was sitting at the computer staring at it and thinking, I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to see what my colleagues have to say about it. I don't know if you had a chance to read this. Apparently, we're still writing for Grandma. Every journalist has had an editor who reminds you of Grandma, reading the paper, being confused, and canceling her subscription because she doesn't get your story. So with that in mind, I guess we do. So here's what I did. Okay, so the print story that I did ended up in the Denver Post Sports. I think that's the sports section. They also use it in business, which for us, that's always a coup that the Denver Post will use our stuff. Usually they have their own reporters that they assign. If there's a local story, they'll assign their own reporters to do it. Our story goes out nationally and to the world, internationally. But here's the story. I don't want to get into the entire story. I just want to show you how I solved my hashtag dilemma. Okay, so right underneath November 17th, I don't know if you can see this, the graph that came out of that question. I wasn't going to get into explaining Twitter. I figured if you don't know what Twitter is, put this down, move on to the next one. But I still think, though, that there's enough information there for any general reader who doesn't know what Twitter is, can kind of get the general sense for what's going on here and understand what the business end of this phenomenon is. So let me just recap what I've learned about writing, and that is, for me, it's about understanding the world and helping everyone else understand the world. A sentence is a subject, verb, and predicate, and edit. Cut it down. What you think is important may not be that important. And then once you go through the process, just one last thing, once you go through the process, go back and read it 2 weeks afterwards. And I bet you 2 weeks later, after you've written it and edited it and cut it down and sent it in, 2 weeks later it's going to look pretty good. So trust yourself and you'll be fine. Thank you.
Me yet? Hello, here I am. Okay, so we're going to have a brief conversation here with both Rachel and Peter. I'll keep it as brief as I can so that you'll have time also to ask questions that you might have. But a couple thoughts that I had from both of your presentations. First of all, both of you sort of had a portion of the conversation that had to do with brevity. And I'm curious if there's ever a time when it makes sense for you to have a depth of argument in your writing, or is that something that you find just always gets in the way of grabbing attention?
So I have to say I hate brevity. I feel like most important arguments take time to state, but most people have short attention spans. And so you're always fighting that. I've dealt with that by trying to produce the same type of information in different forms. So I'll write a book, and then I'll write a 5-page brief, and then an op-ed. And they each have, it's like a fractal, you know, they have to have the same basic content, but the op-ed has a lot of brevity, it's just the point. The book has all the detail, and the 5-pager's kind of in the middle.
What was the question again?
The difference between brevity and depth of argument. So is that ever a tension for you in your writing?
You know, as a reporter, you think that every scrap of information that you have is very important. There are some stories that people will tell you as you're reporting that you want to include, but you can't. There are, I mean, you know, the news events touch on people's lives that are so deeply, and you want to get into their background. You want to get into the moment that they learned something happened. But ultimately, you have to focus on just one part of their story and tell that. So yes, there is some tension. You want to expand on it and you know, keep it in mind that my own drive is to help people understand. I want to get into the weeds, as we call it. Sometimes you can't.
And I'll just ask one final question, and then I'll turn it over to you and whatever questions you want to ask. But it struck me, too, how at some level technology is playing a part in shaping how we're thinking about what it means to be a writer and what it can necessitate us to do as writers. And, of course, our freshmen are sort of natural natives in that habitat in a way that maybe, unfortunately, we should admit we're not. Maybe we've come into it in some way. And I'm curious for a little bit of elaboration from either one of you on how technology might play a role in how you decide to write.
140 characters. Just kidding. You know, technology, it's for me, technology has been touted as being the be-all, end-all of journalism. At least it would be the, look, we have this stream of information that's coming in, and why do we even need journalists if you have information that's being generated by people and it doesn't cost anything? But if you look at a lot of the tweets out there, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them, they're tweeting links to an article that was produced by a journalist. So, you know, as far as if it influences how I write AP style, which is short declarative sentences anyway. And as far as what Twitter, social media, I can picture that as a pipeline that's sending information out, and the oil fields, as if you can think of newspapers and traditional media, would be the oil fields that would be moving through Twitter, and so it doesn't influence me personally. Maybe it should. I don't know. I mean, it's something I have to think about.
That's a fantastic metaphor. I like the striking oil and the pipelines. I think that the technology is, it allows you to provide the same information. If you think of writing as just a way of getting information from your head to other people's heads, the technology lets you do it in a lot of different ways. So, you know, we still don't have the matrix style where we could just hook up our brains to other people's brains and put it all out there. But we're getting closer. So you have infographics, you have tweets, you have movies and videos that have writing behind them. So it gives you a lot more ways for different types of learners to get that information into their heads. I happen to be a very literary type. I like to read things. And for people like me, long-form journalism has come back thanks to thanks to the web, because there's endless amounts of space, so that's nice too.
Okay, I'm going to open it up. Any questions from anyone in the audience? Yeah.
What would you both write about if money were no object? If, say, you won the lottery, would you continue writing? And if so, what would you write about?
So the question is, what would you write about if money were no object?
If I won the lottery? Yeah, right. I would write my business plan on how to double that in 10 years. Actually, if money were no object, I would probably still be doing what I'm doing. I would. I mean, and I say that, I mean, honestly, because we're hypothetical here, right? I mean, you know, I mean, what I do to have a front row of history, of Colorado history, is so much fun. It's not even, just sometimes it doesn't even feel like work to me. And sometimes I'm sitting there, I'm just checking to see if anyone from my office is here. There isn't. Sometimes I'm sitting there working and I'm wondering, gosh, you know, I hope they don't learn that I will do this for free.
Yeah, I actually feel the exact same way. I mean, I would write about this stuff that I really care about, but I would get a private jet to do it so that I could move places more quickly, and then I'd buy a lot of carbon offsets. So.
Yes. The question is, did you always want to be a journalist or a writer? And if not, what else was in your plan?
So when I was real young, I wanted to be a veterinarian because I didn't like people very much. And I wanted to help somebody, so I thought I'd help small animals. But over time, I became less misanthropic, and I wanted to help people. And then it was just sort of different ways of helping people. So running an NGO was one way, going into politics was another way, doing policy work is a third way, and who knows what'll end up happening someday.
I was 8 when I learned I wanted to be a journalist. I was more into kickball and playing in the dirt with my toy soldiers, dreaming of being a cop or a fireman or a soldier or a captain of a ship. Something exciting. And then in my hometown, there was a journalist by the name of Don Bowles, B-O-L-L-E-S, and he was there was an assassination attempt on him. Somebody put a bomb underneath his car and blew him up. And yeah, I won't get into the gory details, but my mom was the type of person who would pray for people she would hear on the news. She hears a story and she's like, oh my gosh, you know, this is so sad. And as she's praying and crying and feeling for this guy, I'm going, my gosh, what was he doing that was so important that they wanted to blow him up? And that was my first introduction to journalism, and that put the whole idea of journalism into the blood and guts that was interesting to an 8-year-old boy along the same level of fireman, soldier, captain of a ship. And so I knew when I was 8.
Yes.
So what do you think makes like a tweet or like a Facebook post like, you know, effective, like, you know, we can racking up likes or whatnot, you know? What do you think makes it effective?
Question is, what makes a Facebook post or a tweet effective? What makes them go viral?
I actually just tweeted a story about this yesterday. There were 6, I don't know if you have a different list, but there is some academic who just did a study of what makes tweets and things go viral. From what I can remember, one was high emotional content. People really care about emotion, things that are more positive. Those were the 2 of the 6 that I remember.
I haven't broken it down. I mean, I didn't read that article. I don't know that list. All I just know from experience, the weigh-in video you saw up there, and all the videos that I've done, I would spend hours and hours on it. What my first 1 million hit on YouTube was a 36-second clip on Peyton Manning talking about Omaha. It's content. It's strong content. I mean, there are people out there who will want to try to figure out, the secret, right? I mean, what is the secret? Sometimes it just is. There's something about it. I mean, good solid content. Some of the things that Rachel was talking about. But if it's some kid falling into a fountain while texting, that's going to go viral.
Others? Yes.
As a reporter for like the tragic events, like school shootings and stuff, in your opinion, how do you feel about? Do you think that like in media they put a little bit more emphasis on these tragic events that happen here, causing sick people to glorify them, and more tragic events occur? Because that's what we've been seeing these last couple of years, especially in Colorado.
That is a fantastic question. Do you know who Alex Teves is? He was one of the 12 people who died at the Aurora Theater shooting. His dad, Tom Teves, and I have had long conversations. And a lot of that hinges on that very question. Do we glorify him? And I'm talking just personally now. I'm not talking industry-wide. Industry-wide, it's this. It's that it's a story. It's part of the story. It happened. Naming the suspect is part of the story. And that was what all this boils down to is if you're covering the story, why do you name the suspect? Is that a fair assessment of that? Or is that, at least that in the conversations that I've had, that is, personally, I wouldn't have a problem not naming the suspect. And for me personally, the idea that we don't cover suicides, we cover them if somebody does it in a public way. If somebody blows themselves up at town hall, yeah, okay, we'll cover it. Some guy jumps off an overpass and ties up traffic, okay, we'll cover it. Some guy decides to take cyanide in a bathroom on a plane, yeah, we're going to cover it. But in general, we don't go in and cover suicides. And tradition has held, and I'm not saying this is exactly what it is, but I've had editors explain to me early on in my career, and then I forgot it. I haven't gone back. So I don't have any data on how this started, but tradition has always been that we don't want copycats for suicides. And for me, why don't we follow that same ideal when it comes to tragic shootings? But I'm part of the industry. I've had my conversations, and it's not a battle that I can win.
Maybe time for one more? Was there a hand up? Yeah.
Rachel, you said that the stories in your work mostly influence people who have the power to make a change. What writing techniques would you say that you use with those people who are maybe less motivated?
It's a terrific question. I would say that actually many of the people who have the power to make change are not very informed. So you would be surprised at how much that collapses upon itself. I think it's about emotion. So the first thing is to make it real to someone. Why should they care? And making that really about a person that they can imagine or a situation they can imagine to get at their emotion. Making it simple, so not obscuring the basics of a story with lots and lots of detail so that the outline is real clear. And then providing a way if somebody wants to get really into depth, they can go there. You give them the sense that you're an expert, you know what you're talking about. But what you're really reaching out to them is on a human level. This is something that they should care about. Here's why they should care, and here's what they can do. And that last step of a motivating activity is really important. I think one of the things that we do that's a disservice to people, those of us who care a lot about the world and want to make change, is we just present out there, here's all the horrible things happening in the world. And that's very demotivating. What you need is here's something bad happening, and here's what you can do that makes it difference. And by providing that last step, you can help someone who's not particularly motivated. If it's a simple step, something easy to do and very concrete, they can start getting involved and getting more knowledgeable.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Appreciate it. Please thank Peter Banda and Rachel Kleinfeld. There may be some more cookies if you like. Look for more events in the future.